All right. Okay, now it looks different for me. Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes.
Great. Then, yeah, let's get started. I'm really happy that you joined us. I hope you also already had some lunch or have something. I see someone eating, so that's great. Because I'm here today to, to tell you a story. And it was a story of when I was hunting a bug. And it was a very, very elusive bug, and it brought us quite some pain. It all started in the last week of a testing phase that lasted several weeks. It was the final day of the last week of this testing phase. It was, of course, Friday. On Monday, we wanted to release a new infrastructure setup to our customers. And so we had been testing it for 2 weeks. Internal testers were trying to find all the problems with it, and it was looking really good. But of course, on Friday afternoon, one of my colleagues logged into the application, and then, something was a bit off. He couldn't really tell at first what was going on because the application looked normal. But after a bit of checking and testing, he realized that he wasn't seeing his own data. He was in the account of someone else. And he was even able to change the data, and it was just as if he had logged in as the other person. So luckily, I personally was on vacation that day. So I got to miss the huge panic that happened after that. And I just joined when we came back together on Monday. Of course, the rollout was canceled. And we came together to discuss what we should do now. I mean, we had only seen this bug once, but it was so serious that we really had to find it and fix it. And so it seemed that our only choice was to figure out what was the problem and what we could do about it. But before I tell you about how this went, I will tell you just quickly why I was involved in this and what was my role. So Polina already introduced me. I'm a software developer at Searchmetrics. I mostly work on the front end. I also like to work with other languages. So my latest pet project I did in Rust. And I also organize events with Women Who Code if we are not in a pandemic. I probably like bugs a little bit too much. At least that's what my agile coach always said. Because you shouldn't like bugs, you should try to avoid them at all costs. And I had been with Searchmetrics for a bit over 2 years, and I didn't really know a lot about infrastructure or deployments or anything at that point. But then we got this project to migrate one part of the infrastructure to a whole new system. And I had no idea. I couldn't probably have explained to you all the steps that were involved in deploying our application. I knew which buttons to click, but I didn't really know all the details. So the problem was that when this project came up from management, most of my front-end colleagues were in the same boat as I was. So in the end, I volunteered to be part of this project because, someone had to do it and someone had to learn it. Okay, so what exactly was the task? So we had a front-end application, it's a React app, plus a backend for front-end Node.js server that provides an API. And this whole thing had to be moved to a different AWS account. That was already quite a lot because the original setup was totally manual. There was no infrastructure as code or anything. It was just someone clicked around in the AWS console and set it up. So and we obviously wanted to do it a bit better. So we had to write CloudFormation templates for everything so that we had a repeatable way to deploy everything. It took a while because we had so much to learn, but we made some progress. And then in the middle of this project, someone came up with an additional requirement and asked us to also improve the caching and add a CDN. So this is where CloudFront came into play as well. And if you're not familiar, CloudFront is the content delivery network service that AWS offers. And what it basically does is if your user makes a request to your application, it will pick the closest CloudFront server node, and this responds to the user. Ideally, if it's static content, it can also cache your content, so the request times are faster and it reduces the load on your servers. Of course, if the content is not static but dynamic, it will forward the request to your own servers. Okay, so CloudFront is a very huge service. It has a lot of options. It gives you a lot of flexibility. You can set up the caching rules based on the path, on the patterns of the path. You can specify how to treat each header, etc. But in the end, it didn't seem so complex at first, but it was not so easy for us because it turns out that our existing setup was already quite complicated. We also had an Nginx server somewhere, and that already added some header rules that we had to fight against. And the biggest problem in the end was that there was a lack of knowledge of the whole system. And of course, it was not really properly documented. So we were just trying to figure out what was going on, what the routes were, what happened on which route, etc., and what should be cached. So we tried to get an overview of everything, added the caching, etc. And in the end, we were quite confident that we managed this task as well. So for the release of this new infrastructure, we made a plan. So at first, we would deploy the new system in parallel to the old one. We would deploy all code changes to both in parallel. So we had two systems that should, in theory, behave exactly the same way. Then we would test a lot on the new system. And if we were confident that it was working fine as expected, we would just update the DNS records to point our main URL to the new infrastructure. So let's think about for a moment about this testing phase, because what types of bugs could we expect to find? As the code was the same for both applications, the unit tests didn't really help us much, right? The code was the same, so that wasn't really anything that we needed to consider. Instead, we were running our E2E tests a lot. We had quite like a good size E2E test suite. Some parts were covered really well, some not so well. And these already found a few issues, for example, connectivity issues, because if you have a lot of backend services that have to connect to this application, it could be that if it's now in a different AWS account, that some of the security group rules don't apply anymore. So we found some issues with the E2E test. And then, of course, we did a lot of manual tests to find anything that we didn't expect or anything that the E2E test did not cover. Yeah, so such as the bug that we did find in the end. And yeah, as you remember, the user logged in and found himself in a different account. It wasn't his. It was very rare because we had never seen it before. It just happened on this Friday for the first and so far only time. It was obviously very critical. We knew that it had happened because we had a screenshot, but we didn't know exactly what had caused it because none of my engineering colleagues were still working at the time. It was like Friday late afternoon. I was on vacation. And we also knew that our automated tests were not covering it because we hadn't seen it so far. We hadn't found it with the test suite. So, okay, we figured out, okay, we had a few steps that we needed to take. We were still stuck at step 1. We had to be able to reproduce this bug somehow. Because if we were able to reproduce it, we could also investigate the issue in detail and try to figure out what exactly was going on. And also, if we were able to reliably reproduce it, could we make sure that we really fixed it in the end? Because otherwise, we could have made some changes and hoped that it had fixed it, but without being able to have a secure way of steps that we can take to reproduce it, we wouldn't know what worked or what didn't. Yeah, and then we can find it, we can fix it, and ideally we can also add some regression tests to make sure it doesn't reappear at some point in the future. So, okay, we started with step 1, first try, manual testing. In the end, that was how the bug appeared the first try. We had some suspicions, so either it was probably related to the new cache, or it was a problem related to how the sessions were stored, because both systems were still sharing some parts of the infrastructure, so we were not exactly sure where the cause was. But you thought, okay, we need to provoke it somehow. It's probably related to several users doing something at the same time. So we tried to get together a few colleagues to provoke the bug. It did not work. The first problem was that it was super boring. So we tried to get together some colleagues, tried them to log into the application and just click around a few pages and see what happens. And yeah, it's not very interesting. So it was really hard to find people to motivate them. So we probably didn't even have enough to force this bug to appear. And there were also some technical difficulties. For example, we had to make sure that all our testers were getting the same CloudFront node, because this is something that you don't really control, right? CloudFront just gives you the node it thinks it's best for you, but you don't really know. So we had to overcome this challenge. It's possible. We edited the hosts file to map one certain CloudFront IP to our app's URL, but this also was another hurdle, especially for the non-engineering colleagues to help us test. So no luck with this approach. So we thought, okay, the task is super boring, so why not have the computer do it? So, okay, yeah, mindless clicking around the application is something perfect for a machine. So, yeah, we are thinking what tools we knew that we could use, and just looking at what we were already using, I thought about Puppeteer. And I think you probably know Puppeteer. It's a Node.js library that allows you to control the Chrome browser, and you can simulate all kinds of workflows, all kinds of interactions with a website. We were already using it for some of our E2E tests. We were also using it in some services. For example, when we needed to render some website with JavaScript or something, it was very useful. Yeah, and this kind of could solve our first issue that the task was too boring for humans to do. We let Puppeteer do it. Okay, then the next issue was the issue of scale, that we didn't have enough people. And for that, we came up with the idea to use AWS Lambda. That's another service that AWS offers, and it's a serverless function. So basically, the idea is that you just write the function and they run it for you. You don't have to think about anything related to setting up a server or anything like that. And it has some advantages that came in really handy. So for one, it's super easy to scale because basically you just deploy your function to AWS, and then it scales automatically based on how many requests are coming into this function. So every time it's invoked, AWS will make sure that there's an instance that can respond. So if you make 500 requests in parallel, AWS will scale up to be able to manage this. So it was perfect. It was also for us, quite simple to set up. We were using the serverless framework, and we already had a very similar function for something totally unrelated, but we could copy a lot of the boilerplate code from that because we already had a Lambda function that was running Puppeteer. So we basically just copy pasted a bunch of the code to get started. It also supports different programming languages, so also JavaScript, what I was most familiar with. And yeah, it's also cheap. So compared to spinning up a few EC2 instances or similar, it's a very cheap option because you only pay for the time that it's really running. Okay, so we have now solved 2 of the 3 problems. We have computer do the boring task. We have Lambda for unlimited scaling. And then we also found a good way to overcome the third problem with the CloudFront IPs, because Puppeteer allows you, has, I don't know how many hundred options that you can supply to the browser. And one of these is a host resolver rule where you can map IP addresses to URLs. So we use that to make sure that we would always use the same CloudFront node for each request. Okay, so based on all these ideas, I wrote the first Lambda function. It was not very spectacular. It was just going to our website, logging in, clicking through a few pages, and then always comparing the account ID that was displayed on the page with the expected account ID for this user. And the Lambda function would then return you a list of all account IDs that it found that were not expected. So yeah, it's like a few hundred lines of code. It's very, very short Lambda function. And then to have the scale, I just had a local script where the main part is just a loop that goes through a list of test users that I had created, and for each user makes a request to this Lambda function to use this user, logged into the page, etc. It's also super simple. It was just like round robin going through the users, and if it ran out of users, it would just start at the beginning. So I wasn't sure if that would work or not, because I wasn't sure if I could reuse the same users over and over. Luckily, it turned out to work fine, because when I ran it for the first time, I just started kind of small, right? I took, I think, about 10 parallel users. Each user was making 3 navigation steps in the application, and then I just ran it. On the first try, nothing came up, but it was kind of expected because the cache was empty, and also the Lambda functions take a little bit of time to spin up. So it could be that they were not ready at the same time, and the requests were not truly in parallel. But already on the second try, I got a response like this. That some of my Lambda requests showed me, oh wait, I found account IDs that I did not expect for this user. Yeah, I think, yeah, as you see, 9 times out of 10, I got the wrong account ID. So this was really good. I obviously tried it a few more times, but it was very reliable, and already with like 10 parallel users, I was able to get the wrong request. And the really good thing about this was now we knew exactly at what time I had seen the bug, so that my colleague from the infrastructure team was able to really dig into the CloudFront logs and look for something that might explain the behavior. And he found something that was not really a nice thing to find. I will show you right here. So there were some requests that had this combination of headers. If you look at the ones that are highlighted, you will see that there's a set cookie header, and at the same time, there's a hit from CloudFront. So it means that this response came from CloudFront directly, so from the CloudFront cache, but it had a set cookie with the session cookie. So it means the CloudFront had cached this request, and the next time someone made a request on the same route, they would get the response from the cache with the set cookie header with the session that belongs to someone else. So that was obviously not something you want to find. Yeah, so apparently we had made a huge mistake when we set up the routing rules in CloudFront. So we went back and checked all the routes again, realized where we had made a mistake. But just to be very sure, we went through all of them once more. And I also improved this Lambda function that we had a little bit. So now it was, in addition to what it was doing before, it was also checking all requests that the browser made, and look for this combination of set cookie header plus a cache hit from CloudFront. Luckily, we didn't find any other route that was a problem. So at this point, we had finished step 2. We were able to understand what was going on, and we were able to fix it as well. So We fixed it. We ran the tests a few more 100 times just to be sure, and the bug didn't appear anymore. And then as a last bonus step, we've created some kind of regression tests. So I just made the script that I had to run this Lambda function from my local computer. I made another Lambda function out of it that is scheduled to run every day. And it basically does the same thing as the script did before. It calls the other Lambda function to simulate 10 parallel users and just make sure that all of them have their correct sessions. Yeah, and if it would find something, which has not happened so far, it would send me an alert. So yeah, at this point, the story is over. We were happy. We were able to roll out this new infrastructure. It's live now. People are using it. The bug has not appeared so far. But I think it was a really good experience. And I personally, and I think my whole team, we learned quite a few things. I mean, one thing that I guess everyone who's ever had to handle something like that is that caching bugs are really annoying because they're so hard to test for. Because our normal EGE test suite would probably never have found this issue because you always have just one user. And it could be that for such a caching bug, you only find it if you have multiple users, or you have to have something that's running over a time span to notice strange behaviors. Yeah, something that we really learned is that automation is always a good idea. Don't ask your colleagues to do some stupid repetitive tasks because they don't like it, while a computer won't complain. What we also realized is that basically anything can be used to write an automated test. It doesn't have to really be like a dedicated tool or library. I mean, okay, Puppeteer kind of is a testing tool, but we didn't use any testing framework, so to say. There were no assertions or anything in the code. So basically anything that works and does the job can be used. And it also really helps if you just use a tool that you are familiar because you're so much faster. I think in total, writing this whole code took less than a day because we were able to copy some code from existing libraries. We had some ideas of what we could do because we had used Puppeteer before, we had used Lambda before. And the really good thing is if we use something that we already had, it was very easy to set up because we didn't need to get permission to do anything. We were just able to deploy some Lambda functions on our own. One thing that I learned, which I had never really thought about, is that an automated test can be really useful even if it's just for one single use. So after we had found this bug, we didn't really need this test anymore. So I had just written this whole test for one day. And after that, it wasn't really needed anymore. But it was super useful. So automated tests are not only useful in cases where you want to protect some functionality over time to make sure that code changes don't break something. It can also be really, really useful for cases like this, where you have one big problem that you need to analyze. Yeah, and one thing that I want to tell you in particular is that I think Puppeteer and Lambda is a great way if you want to simulate multiple users that do something at the same time. Because we're also looking at our load tests that we had, and those really didn't help so much because usually, at least the ones that we were using, they just make simple HTTP requests. So you can load test some HTTP endpoint, but it's not the same if you want to simulate a real user interaction where usually there's a lot of requests involved and you have the whole browser context and everything. And if you need something like that, I think Puppeteer on Lambda is a really nice solution. Yeah, and then one last word, what we learned and the hard way is that you should really know your routes or your data or your code. And it can be really dangerous if you have some parts of the code that are not well understood and not well documented. Recently I had this not as bad problem, but also where it really showed that you really need to understand your data structures to be able to add caching, for example. So yeah, document your stuff. Yes, and with these final learnings, I am done with my part of the presentation. I'm happy to receive your questions. You can also find me later on the Slack channel and on LinkedIn or Twitter if your questions come, I don't know, later today or tomorrow. Thank you.
Ooh, thank you.
Great, that was super nice. So thank you, Sarah. So we have a few questions in the chat, and I think the first one was Severin. Do you want to read the question, Severin, or should I?
The first one you already answered like a minute later. So I was asking about how you handled the user credentials, but then you said you just iterated through a list of them and it just worked out of the box.
I can maybe just add. So
sure.
I created a few test users because I wanted to be sure that the users were really like the simplest form of user, just one like very basic permissions and everything. I also didn't want to interfere with anything else. And I just encrypted their passwords and deployed them with the Lambda function. And then I had a decryption key as an environment variable for this Lambda function. It was not the most secure setup, but was good enough.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, I was also thinking related to that, like if you were having like a few users, like did this affect like the analytics of the website maybe? Like some extra traffic?
It could have, but the thing was the analytics was still using the old, so that was still the test setup that wasn't really used by real users
Okay.
at the time. So it was fine because the analytics were, I think, I'm not sure. I think it didn't make so much of an impact. Maybe there was a spike somewhere. I'm not sure. I think most of analytics that we use are based on the public URL. And in this case, I was using kind of a secondary URL that we had created just for this purpose of testing this new infrastructure. It was not a URL that anyone else was using.
That makes sense. Yeah. So there is one more question from Kim. Like, Kim, do you want to read it out loud, or should I do it for you?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, you basically answered part of it when it comes to finding the bugs. So as I understand, you ran this Lambda function against this new environment, which was not yet kind of production.
Mm-hmm.
It was deployed already, but not used like productively. But so you run this Lambda function on a daily basis now, or
Yes.
okay, and do you run this against your production, or is there some sort of staging which is provided by AWS which you can use?
In this case, it's running against production. So in this case, it will affect the metrics. You have some weird spike of 10 users logging in when the function is running. I'm not sure what AWS provides. In our case, we wanted to run it against production just to make sure, because the error came from CloudFront, and CloudFront is set up, at least in our case, it's based on the main URL of our application. So we have to kind of use production to hit really the CloudFront as well. Mm-hmm. Our staging is not using CloudFront at the moment, but I think you could do it the same way. If you have set up your staging to also use the exact same setup as production, which is probably better anyway, you can just run the same kind of test against your staging environment.
Cool. That would be nice. I mean, because otherwise it feels a bit Like, to run something against production, it always feels a bit dangerous to me. But it works.
Yeah.
Of course, in that case, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, I'm kind of confident because it doesn't really do a lot. It's just like if a user logs in and it navigates through, it doesn't really manipulate anything. But I agree. It would be better if we could run it on stage like first and then verify on production maybe. But yeah, in our case, it doesn't work because the CloudFront is not set up for stage.
No, but I also think it's a valid use case. Like if the test or the automated script is just like doing read-only operations on production, I think, and you can filter those requests from the analytics. I think it's fine to do that on production. But also like in e-commerce websites, if like actually to put the order, like I don't think you need to test that in production sometimes, because if that is actually broken, like you will notice a bit faster. But yeah, I think Severin had another question. Do you want to go? And
yeah, sure. It's just you said you just happened to know Puppeteer and the Lambdas were just lying around, so you basically did that. Was just a lucky coincidence, or did you already know that most other front-end testing frameworks are not capable to run on Lambda?
So we wanted to now we considered a few other options, but then we always had the hurdle to overcome that we had to get the user credentials in there somehow safely, or we had, if it was like a paid platform, we would have had to go through some layers of management to get approval. My colleague tried with Selenium, but it didn't seem so easy to have to get the scale. So if you run it locally, you apparently, at least he didn't manage in the time that he spent on it to like run it in parallel with a lot of requests. Yeah, so we didn't explore probably all the options. So there might be alternatives that are equally as valid.
You got lucky, basically. Yeah, you had a pretty nice setup.
Nice. Awesome. No, but it's also true that, for example, in WebDriver, to this point, you cannot, like the headers thing you were adding in Puppeteer, you cannot do it in WebDriver. So like right now, in the future, probably you will do it. But so I don't know if it was luck, but I think it was a good choice of a tool for this use case.
Yeah, we knew that these browser options were quite powerful in Puppeteer. So this was also one of the reasons why we decided to go with it, because we had already the suspicion that we would need a few of them. For example, the IP mapping part was really nice to have. And we tested some other, I don't even remember. So the first iteration of this Lambda function did a few different things before we even knew how we could get the account ID from the website. We tried a few different things, and we were looking at some other some other information that we got from this Puppeteer API.
Awesome. Yeah. I think in Selenium you need an external proxy or something to manipulate the headers, right? Something like a browser mob proxy. At least it's not convenient.
Yeah, you would need that. Like with Selenium 4, can use now the CDP, like the dev tools, and now you can like do that if you want to. But yeah, there's like a space for that talk. Actually, next week, this is the webinar with Simon. So, are there any other questions? Because like if someone wants to ask a question, just feel free to unmute yourself. For the time being, I have one more, because when I was listening to everything you were saying, Sarah, like, so it seems that the issues were related to the infrastructure configuration, not really the app, right?
Yeah.
So did you also dig into the process of like, how can we make sure that the configuration is well done in the future? Like, did you do something in that sense?
So at the time, I didn't really know about all the options that we had. So it felt already like a huge improvement that we now had like CloudFormation templates that reflected what was actually deployed. We had those reviewed by the very experienced infrastructure engineers, but only later. I think it was at a conference I heard a talk where someone explained that how they were testing their templates, and I found it really interesting, but I didn't know it at the time, so we didn't really do much more than set up these templates. Yeah, so no testing, so to say.
No, I was just asking because I mean, I have seen it in different companies, and it also has happened to us in Sauce Lab. Somebody changing the infrastructure and something breaks. Like all the process to review the code works, but like changing infrastructure, like the reviews sometimes are not as strict as they should be.
Yeah. So now basically every time we have to change something, we might allow ourselves to try it just from the console, but then we have to make sure that we update the template as well. And this change is always reviewed by one of the infrastructure engineers who are, well, have the most experience with AWS.
You said this whole project was basically a whole migration from one system to another, where you basically let them run in parallel and then switch from one to the other. Are you considering also doing that with just your regular deployments and testing, since you already have like infrastructure as code? So it should be like a finger snap to get another set of your same infrastructure running, and then you can do stuff like blue-green deployments, where you run the test first and then switch the URL where the content delivery is pointing to?
So we're definitely thinking about different ways of deploying at the moment, because we had some totally unrelated issues with that. And yeah, so during this whole project, there were so many things. We have such a huge list of things we wanted to improve, but then we always said, okay, we cannot do everything at the same time. Otherwise it will never finish. So in the end, we kind of cut back on a lot of these ideas, but yeah, definitely we like relatively on top of my backlog is something how we could improve the whole deployment process with something like this. We probably wouldn't like to spin up the whole stack again, because the whole infrastructure stack includes also, for example, a Redis cluster that stores the sessions, and this should obviously not be redeployed every time. But yeah, I think at least the servers that are running the app could be an option. Otherwise, we don't run these CloudFormation templates a lot. So only really if we make a change. And the other deployment is just done with containers at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. I also don't have it, but I would like it. That's why I asked if you have it.
Cool. Yeah, if there are no more questions before giving the word to someone else, yeah, I just want to thank Sarah a lot. Like, it takes some time to prepare a presentation, to do it this well. Like, I think it was a really nice and presentation, super clear. The problem exposed, how you approached it and how you solved it. That was like a really nice presentation. So I think many of us can take like this learning from how to find a bug, reproduce it, and then find the root cause. So that was very nice. Thank you. So like, we're not going to start wrapping things up, but before that, Rudolf is here with us, and he wants to share his next events in the meetup he's constantly working on. So another member of the testing community. So maybe, do you want to share your screen, Rudolf? Or?
Yes. So first I have to stop my son. Sorry. So yes. So hello everyone. So Diego, thank you for the possibility to do an advertising for our Vienna meetup. Sarah, congratulations, great talk. So I would like to invite you to talk to hold the same talk in Vienna. Yes, maybe later I come to you. It was great. So, and now I want to do advertising as every meetup. So We in the next weeks we have 2 meetups. Yeah, so I will share my screen. Yeah, is this okay?
Yeah, go. Like nice T-shirt, by the way.
Yes, I know. So I have 3 of them, and yes, so that's all about it. Yeah. Sorry. 1 minute for my son. Yeah, okay. Okay, this is when you are working from home. Yeah. So sorry, guys. Yeah. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Yes. So the next would be the next meetup is next week, where Jeremias Rössler is talking about test automation healing with AI and without AI. Yeah. And then 2 weeks later, we have our normal test busters night, which in this case we have more than 3 speakers. We have 5 speakers. We have talked about testing blockchain, security testing, DevOps, and monitoring, and so on. Yeah. So I will post the links to the meetup in the chat, and I would like to see a lot of you. And this is now from Vienna. So thank you. And yes, thank you.
No, thank you for your dedication to this meetup as well. Like, if anyone can join that one, it's like also a really good meetup. I like to go there. I was there once doing a talk, right? Yeah, like in my previous company. So it's a nice place to go. Also join the online events, and anytime, like, and if anyone has.
This time it is only remotely, yeah. So I'm pretty sure that in November then we start with that you can come to Vienna, and then maybe Sarah, you come to Vienna, so we can discuss it.
Why not?
Vienna is a nice place to live.
I always wanted to go to Vienna. So
And
Yes,
when you are
then-
invited
Felt
by, and
Yes,
when Rudolf
then-
invites you, like the lunch is schnitzel in.
Yes, and then we go for
It's-
the real Wiener Schnitzel, yeah, not for the Touristen Schnitzel, yeah.
No, but it's true. Like they invite you for that in the meeting. So yeah, thank you, Rudolf. So yeah, well, last chance. If there are more, anybody has any more questions or comments for Sarah? 1, 2, 3. No, okay. So yeah. Before wrapping things up, again, thank you, Sarah, and remember that we have next week the webinar with Simon. Like Paulina shared the link, and we're gonna also share it in the Slack channel. And in 2 weeks, we're gonna have our next meetup. We're gonna create the event soon. It's gonna be Josh Grant, solutions architect from SOSLab, and he's gonna talk about testing with Python. So many people who like Python can join the meetup as well. And I think that's pretty much from us. I don't know if you have something else, Paulina or Sarah.
No, thank you, everyone. I think we can close for today and see you on Slack and on our next meetup.
Yeah, thanks for joining, and thanks for having your video on. That's really nice to see some faces.
Yeah,
Otherwise, it
exactly.
feels super strange to just talk to my screen loudly.
No, it was great. Thank you, everyone.
Great
Have a
talk.
good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.